Donald Trump is surging in the latest 2024 election polls and has taken a huge lead in the Electoral College with just 1 month to go until the election in November. Today, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 electoral map based on the newest poll from every single state. And so we're going to fill in the map based on poll closing order. Voting doesn't end in every single state at the same time. It'll end first in states on the East Coast, and then the map will slowly fill in out west. And so in this video, you'll be able to see how the map is going to be colored in red and blue on the night of November 5th. And so we're going to start off at 7 p.m. Eastern time, where polls are going to close in 6 states. These 6 states make up a combined 60 electoral votes. Most of them are going to be pretty solid for one candidate or the other. Donald Trump is easily going to win Indiana, Kentucky, and South Carolina by solid margins. While Vermont is the most liberal state in the country, it'll easily go to the vice president. Virginia, though, is going to be much more competitive. Many polls have it as a toss-up. In fact, a recent Research America poll has the vice president ahead by just 1%. The latest Emerson College poll, though, does show her up by 7. This is probably overestimating her support. Emerson College does tend to lean to the left, but based on the newest poll that we have, Virginia is going to be likely blue, but just barely. Down in Georgia, we have our first swing state, a state that Joe Biden won in the last election. Georgia is going to be very close once again, but this time Donald Trump has the lead. He's ahead in the most recent Atlas Intel poll. Atlas Intel was the #1 most accurate pollster in the 2020 election, and looking at the spread of the last 8 polls conducted in the Peach State, Kamala Harris leads in just 2 of them. There's no doubt that going into October, the former president has a huge advantage in the swing state of Georgia, which is going to be tilt red on our map. Next up, at 7:30 p.m., voting will end in 3 additional states. Trump is easily going to win West Virginia, while in Ohio, he's on track to carrying the Buckeye State for a 3rd time. He leads by 6 points in the most recent poll. However, this is a left-leaning poll conducted by the New York Times and Siena College. In the end, he's probably going to win Ohio by a double-digit margin when all the votes are counted. And so on our map, Ohio is going to be leaned red, but in the end, it is going to be a likely state for Trump at the very minimum. And then down in North Carolina, this is the second swing state on the map. Georgia has already gone to Trump. And now in North Carolina, the former president has also retaken the lead. He is ahead by 2% in the most recent poll. Polling in the state has been pretty competitive over the last few weeks if you just go by the raw numbers. But in 2020, all the polls said Joe Biden was going to win North Carolina. In fact, he led throughout the entire 2020 calendar year in the polling average. There was not a single point in time where Trump took the lead in North Carolina in 2020, but in the end, Biden lost the state. Trump came out on top by 1.3%, and with Trump leading today, it's a pretty good sign that he's going to win the Tar Heel state for a 3rd time, a state he won in both 2016 and 2020, and now 2024. North Carolina is going to be lean red. Moving on now to the 8 p.m. poll closing, where voting will end in 15 states across the eastern half of the United States, as well as the District of Columbia. It's at this point where you'll kind of get a sense of how the rest of the night is going to go, whether Trump or Harris are outperforming expectations. And at this point, many races are quickly going to be called in either Trump or Harris's favor. The former president is easily going to win Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama, while the vice president will take Illinois, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maryland, and the District of Columbia, with New Jersey and Delaware as likely blue states. Before we continue, 81% of you guys are not currently subscribed, so I'd really appreciate it if you guys could take the time to subscribe right now to help us get to 300,000 by the election. Also, make sure you join my Discord server to chat with me personally. Link in the description below. Moving on up to the Northeast, we have 2 competitive races in New Hampshire and Maine. The polling here is really skewed in favor of Democrats. We have a lot of bad polls that have come out over the last few weeks. The University of New Hampshire is probably the worst pollster out there. They consistently overestimate Democrats and are always outliers. According to their recent New Hampshire poll, Harris leads by 11%. That simply isn't going to happen. While in Maine, they had a poll that said that Harris was going to win by 17. That is even more unlikely considering Joe Biden only won Maine by 9 points in the last election. But according to the most recent Pan-Atlantic Research poll, the vice president is ahead by 9, while in the 1st district, she's going to win by a solid margin. And then in the 2nd, Trump leads by 7 points in that recent recent poll. So New Hampshire is going to be likely blue along with the state of Maine as a whole, while its first district is going to be solid and the second district will be likely for Trump. Down in Florida, we have a state that really just doesn't attract the attention it once did. Even in 2020, it was considered to be one of the most important states in the entire country, but in the end, Trump won it by 3.4%. Republicans did amazing in the midterms, with the Senate seat going to Marco Rubio by 16 points and the governorship to Ron DeSantis by nearly 20. Today, Donald Trump has taken a commanding lead in the Sunshine State. He leads by 4% in the most recent poll, and this was a poll conducted by a Democratic sponsor, so he's probably winning by more. In the end, I fully expect the former president to carry Florida by 7 to 10 points. It's going to be likely red in the end, but according to the pure data we have right now, the most recent poll has it as a lean red state, but a victory nonetheless, providing him with 30 crucial electoral votes. And finally, in Pennsylvania, the Keystone State's 19 electoral votes are going to be the most important on this map, because if Trump wins North Carolina and Georgia, if he also wins Pennsylvania, he's going to get to 270 electoral votes if he wins all of the other solid red states that we are yet to fill in. And the good news for him is that according to the most recent Patriot polling poll, Trump leads by a 1% margin. In fact, he leads in all 5 of the most recent polls from the Keystone State. There's no doubt he is going to win Pennsylvania. He has taken a commanding lead. He's ahead on Real Clear Politics now as well. So the state is going to be tilted red, and this will be more than enough for the former president to get to 270 electoral votes, as long as he wins all the other states that he is currently expected to carry. 30 minutes later at 8:30, polls will close in Arkansas, which Trump is going to easily win. Fast forward another half hour and we'll see voting end in 14 states across the country, from Arizona all the way to New York, worth a total of 157 electoral votes. We're going to start off with these solid states and get them out of the way. Donald Trump is easily going to win North and South Dakota, along with Wyoming, all of Nebraska except its second district, Kansas, and Louisiana, while Kamala Harris does not have any solid states at this time. If you watched the recent debate, then you'll know that the bias from the moderators is yet another example of the media environment contributing to division and making it hard for people to think for themselves. That's why I use Ground News, a website and app that gathers news from 50,000 sources around the world, so you can stay fully informed and see through media manipulation. Check it out for yourself at ground.news/election time. We can see here that there are over 600 articles on a recent story asking who won the Harris-Trump presidential debate. If we look at the coverage details and bias distribution, we can see which news sources cover this story, along with a breakdown of the political leaning of the outlets reporting. 41% of them lean left, while 22% lean right. If we want to compare headlines, we can see an outlet on the left reporting Harris won the debate, and it wasn't even close, while this headline from an outlet that leans right calls out the biased moderators from ABC. Within competitive states, we're going to begin in Colorado, where Kamala Harris leads by a double-digit 10-point margin in the most recent poll. This poll conducted by Morning Consult and Bloomberg. They are probably one of the most biased pollsters out there. Their polls are always outliers. Colorado's probably still going to go to Kamala Harris, but likely by around a 7-point margin. But based on just the data we have right now, the state is going to be likely blue, but I expect it to be a lot closer than what the polls are currently telling us. While in New Mexico, the vice president leads by 8% in the most recent Survey USA poll. This is a little bit more accurate. She's probably going to win the state by around 6 to 7 points. 8 points really not too far off. We even have some polls from earlier last month showing Harris up by just 5. And so New Mexico, based on the most recent poll, is just barely going to squeak by as a likely state for the vice president. Next up, in Texas, we have a state where Democrats simply do not have a chance. They thought they could win it in 2020. Many polls said that Joe Biden was going to lose the Lone Star State by just 1%. That was never going to happen even from the beginning. He lost the state by 6% when all the votes were counted, and today Donald Trump is on track to win the state for a third time in a row. He leads by 5 points in the most recent poll, but this is a Democratic-sponsored poll. I would expect Trump to win Texas by a double-digit margin. It's probably going to be likely red when all the votes are counted this November, and so Texas will be lean red based on just the pure data, but I fully expect the former president to perform much better. The second district of Nebraska is going to be likely blue, with Kamala Harris leading by 9 points in the most recent poll. And then we have one more likely blue state at this hour, and that will be the Empire State of New York, which is surprisingly competitive. Kamala Harris leads by 14 points in the most recent poll. In fact, just one out of the last 5 polls has her ahead by a solid 15-point margin, despite every single Democrat since Bill Clinton in 1992 having been able to win New York by 15 percentage points or more. She's currently on track to pull off the worst performance in this state since Michael Dukakis in 1988. The Empire State will be likely blue on our map. And now we're left with the 4 most competitive states where voting will end at 9 p.m. We're going to begin down in Arizona, worth 11 electoral votes. Trump is currently on track to win. There's no doubt about that. He's taken a pretty commanding lead in the state. In fact, out of all 7 of the swing states, none of them currently lean more to the right than Arizona. Trump leads by 1% in the most recent poll, but besides the 2 morning consult polls, which again heavily lean towards the left, every other poll has shown Trump ahead, with one of them showing a tie. And so currently, the state of Arizona is going to be tilt red based on the most recent poll, but Trump is performing a lot better than he was in 2020 when he lost the state entirely to Joe Biden. Moving up now to the Midwest, we have Minnesota. This is Tim Walz's home state. Kamala Harris chose Minnesota's governor to be her running mate, and according to the most recent poll, she leads by 6%. In fact, none of the polls released in September show Kamala Harris leading by more than 7 points. In fact, every single one of them has her underperforming Joe Biden's 7.1% margin from back in 2020. And when Joe Biden ran in the last election, he did not have Minnesota's literal governor on the ticket with him. So Kamala Harris leading by anything less than 7 points is pretty abysmal, and it's a sign that she is going to perform much worse than Joe Biden did 4 years ago. Minnesota is going to be lean blue on our map, with the most recent poll having her ahead by just 6 points. This is not where she wants to be. Next up, in Wisconsin, I can see this being the closest state in the country. It's probably going to be decided by the smallest margin out of any of the competitive states. Trump did win the state in 2016 by 0.76%. He lost it in 2020 by a smaller margin. Biden carried it by just 0.63, but this was an incredibly surprising margin. Joe Biden was supposed to win Wisconsin by 7 points according to the polling average. He won it by less than a tenth of his predicted margin. And so today, Donald Trump leads in the most recent Atlas Intel poll. Once again, this was the most accurate pollster of the 2020 election cycle. Trump leading in any poll from Wisconsin is a pretty big deal, because 4 years ago, we had just lines of polls showing that Biden was going to win by 6, 7, 8, double digits sometimes, and he eventually won the state, but by a much lesser margin than anyone could have expected. And so this is yet another sign that Trump is doing much better than he was in 2020, with Wisconsin currently as a tilt red state on our map based on the most recent poll. And then in Michigan, Trump has also taken the lead here. According to the latest Atlas Intel poll, he leads by a 4% margin. We have a previous poll from the New York Times. It shows an even race between Harris and Trump, and considering that the New York Times is a left-leaning pollster, this is a pretty good result for the former president. And on top of that, you have to consider the fact that Michigan has always underestimated support for the former president. In 2016, he wasn't even supposed to get anywhere close to defeating Hillary Clinton. And then in 2020, Biden was supposed to win Michigan by 7 to 8 points. He eventually won it by less than 3. And so based on the current data, Michigan is going to be lean red, with Donald Trump on track to win the state by a larger margin than both Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. An hour later at 10 p.m. on the East Coast, voting will end in 4 additional states. Trump is easily going to win Montana and Utah, while Iowa is going to be slightly more competitive. Based on just the polling, the state is going to be lean red, with the former president ahead by 4 points, but we all know he's going to win the state by upwards of 8 to 10. Polling in 2020 did the same thing. It heavily underestimated Trump. He was supposed to win Iowa by just over 1%. He eventually won it by 8.2. And so Trump being ahead by 4 isn't that big of a deal. He's still going to win the state, and he's going to win its 6 electoral votes, but Iowa for now will be lean red on our map. And then in Nevada, we find our last swing state. The silver state hasn't gone red since 2004, so Trump never won the state, not in 2016 or 2020. He's won every other swing state at some point in the last 2 election cycles, but Nevada is one that he's never been able to capture. capture. Looking at the polling today, Kamala Harris leads by just 1%, but the tides here are turning. According to the polling average, we essentially have a tied race. I can definitely see Trump flipping the silver state this cycle. The state overestimated Biden by around 3 points last time, and Kamala Harris simply isn't performing nearly as well as Biden was in the last election. She leads by 1 point in the most recent poll. That honestly doesn't say too much. We had a previous poll from Qantas Insights with Trump up by 1. Considering that Nevada is shifting to the right with the state electing a Republican governor back in 2022, I would say Trump is still the slight favorite here, but based on just the data alone, it is going to be tilt blue on our map. Kamala Harris is going to win just one of the 7 battleground states. And then at 11 p.m. Eastern Time, voting will end in 5 additional states. Kamala Harris is going to win Washington, California, and Hawaii by solid margins. Oregon's going to be likely blue, and then Idaho will be solid red. And then finally, at 1 a.m. Eastern Time, Trump is going to win Alaska. This will give him 3 electoral votes. And so based on the newest poll from every single state, the former president is going to win 6 of 7 swing states. This will give him 306 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 232. Trump has now taken a commanding lead, particularly in the Midwest. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe right now for more content. JD Vance destroyed Tim Walz in the first and only vice presidential debate. Democrats had a lot of work to do as Kamala Harris continues to slip behind in the polls, with Trump surging in the swing states. Walz did not get what he needed to do done, and this puts him and the vice president in a very precarious position as we enter the final month of the campaign. And in this video, I'll be updating my 2024 electoral map to show you how the math has changed for both Harris and Trump following the debate. We'll begin by filling in the solid states for both candidates. These are states where either Harris or Trump are going to win by 15 percentage points or more. The vice president is going to easily carry Washington, California, Hawaii, as well as Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maryland, and the District of Columbia, along with the 1st District of Maine. This gives her just 109 electoral votes. While for Trump, he is going to win Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakota, all of Nebraska except the 2nd District, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, South Carolina, Alaska, and the 2nd District of Maine, along with Iowa, a state he won in both 2016 and 2020 by a nearly double-digit margin. And so with these safe states filled in for both candidates, Donald Trump takes an early lead with 132 electoral votes. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz at just 109. Vance's strong performance last night is definitely going to help out the GOP in winning Iowa by the largest margin they've won it by since the 1980s. Now, for the likely states, these are races in which either candidate will win by 7 to 15 points. They are going to be noticeably more competitive, but one candidate will still maintain a slight edge. And so starting off with the likely blue states, we have Oregon and Illinois, 2 states that went to Joe Biden by solid margins back in 2020. He won Oregon by 16 points, Illinois by 17. Kamala Harris simply isn't going to perform as well as the incumbent president. And then up in the Northeast, we have New York, New Jersey, and Delaware. Democrats have really been struggling, especially in New York and New Jersey. I mean, in New York, their leaders have just been plagued by scandal. First, in 2022, we had the resignation of Andrew Cuomo as governor, and then Kathy Hochul wasn't any more popular. Her first lieutenant governor resigned due to scandal, and then just a few days ago, New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who is, of course, a Democrat, was indicted on charges of corruption. And so really this has tanked support for Democrats in the Empire State. Bob Menendez in New Jersey isn't helping them out either. And so these 3 traditionally blue states, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware, are going to be a lot more competitive than they were 4 years ago when Joe Biden won all 3 of them by 15 percentage points or more. And finally, we have Colorado, a state that Biden won by nearly 14 points in the last election. I'm going to give Harris the benefit of the doubt. I have her winning Colorado by just over 7 points, so it's barely going to be a likely blue state. But at this point, Colorado is still relatively liberal. It will be quite difficult for Trump to make too many inroads there. However, he will definitely do much better than he did in 2020. Now it's time for the likely red states, states that Trump is going to win by 7 percentage points or more. We're going to begin with Ohio, a state that he won in both of the last two elections. He actually flipped it back in 2016. Before this, I went to Obama by 3 points in 2012. And then in 2020, everybody thought Ohio was going to be a lot more competitive. Polls showed that he was going to win it by just 1%. But in the end, Trump carried the Buckeye State by an 8-point margin. He's going to win it by a double-digit margin this time around. There's no doubt Ohio is likely red. And then down in Texas, we have another state that was thought to be very competitive in 2020, despite it not having gone blue since 1976. People thought Joe Biden could actually pull off a victory in the Lone Star State, but that was never going to happen. Trump eventually won it by 6 points. Not really the best margin. He won it by 9 in 2016, but against Kamala Harris this November, the former president is on track to win Texas by 10 percentage points or more. Before we continue, nearly 80% of you guys are not subscribed, so please take the time to subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the description below. And then the last likely state on this map is going to be Florida. Just 4 years ago, Florida was among the most competitive states in the country. Polls had Joe Biden winning by 2 to 3 points. He eventually lost it by that margin, which came as a pretty big surprise. He did worse than Hillary Clinton 4 years prior. And today, Florida is no longer in play. It isn't considered a battleground. It's not a swing state. It's not even remotely competitive. Donald Trump is going to win by 7 to 10 points. We saw in 2022, Governor Ron DeSantis got reelected by a 20-point margin. The race in Florida is going to be more competitive on the presidential level, but there's no doubt Republicans are going to win it for a third time in a row with Trump at the top of the ticket. So Florida will be the final likely red state going to Trump. And so with both the solid and likely states now filled in for both candidates, the former president continues to lead with 219 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 191. Trump is now just 51 electoral votes away from the presidency. We're now left with 12 states. These are going to be the lean and tilt states, the most competitive states on the map. Together, they're worth 128 electoral votes, less than a quarter of the electoral college, but they really do wield all the power. It is in these states where the election is won or lost, especially key states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Georgia. So we're going to start off with the lean blue states for Harris. First state she's going to win by 2 to 7 points. And we're going to begin up in the Northeast with New Hampshire and Maine. She's probably going to win these states by the midpoint of Clinton and Biden's margins from 8 and 4 years ago. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won New Hampshire by 0.37. She won Maine by 2.9. Joe Biden did a little better. He won New Hampshire by 7.4, Maine by 9.1. Kamala Harris is probably going to win both of these states by around 4 to 6 points. She is definitely favored, but these are not going to be impressive victories by any means. Moving on down to New Mexico, this is a state that Democrats have not lost since 2004. Joe Biden actually won it by a double-digit margin in 2020, but Democrats really aren't going to do too much better in New Mexico in the coming decades. They're probably going to lose it in less than 20 years as the Hispanic vote continues to shift to the right, and New Mexico is the only state in the country with a majority Hispanic electorate. They really are starting to favor Trump and the GOP more and more, and so that is why I have it as a lean blue state. Kamala Harris, believe it or not, is doing much worse with minority voters than Biden was in 2020. She's basically performing on par with Hillary Clinton and her performance with minority voters from 2016, which is a really bad sign because minority voters make up a huge block of the Democratic coalition. And so New Mexico being lean blue is not a good sign for the vice president in a state that Biden carried by 11 points in the last election. And now for the lean Trump states, we have quite a few of them, many of them in the Sun Belt. I'm going to begin with Arizona, which has quickly become the most conservative of the 8 swing states. I also include Virginia as one of those toss-ups, and we might even start to include Minnesota after this point. But Arizona, out of all the states left, is probably going to go to Trump by the largest margin. He's been absolutely dominating in the polls there. He's led in all 10 of the last 10 polls conducted in the state. His odds in Arizona, according to the betting markets, are higher than his odds in both North Carolina and Georgia. And so a state that Biden won in the last election, Kamala Harris is almost certain to lose it this time around. Arizona is going to be lean red. with the former president on track to win by around 3 to 4 points. And then moving out east, we have North Carolina, the only swing state that's gone to Trump in both 2016 and 2020. He won it by 4 points 8 years ago, and then 4 years ago, he won the state by just over 1%. But this was a really good surprise for Republicans because basically all the polling said that they were going to lose the Tar Heel state entirely, but somehow Trump came out with a victory. And so today, he's on track to win North Carolina for a third time in a row. He's dominating the polls just like in Arizona, but Mark Robinson is not going to help Trump here. He's probably going to pull him down, but Trump has done very well in North Carolina in the 2 elections he's running already, and he's going to do well once again. I see him winning by around 3 percentage points. Next up in Georgia, this was the most competitive state in 2020. It was decided by the smallest margin. Just 0.24% of the electorate separated the incumbent president and the former president, but today, there's no doubt Trump is on track to win Georgia back. Biden's victory here in 2020 was the first for any Democrat since 1992. Kamala Harris is not going to make history again. She simply isn't performing nearly as well as Biden was in the last election. In 2016, Trump actually won the Peach State by 5 points, so Georgia still is a fundamentally red state, and so it's going to go back into the GOP column this time around. And what we're seeing is that North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona, these 3 states are slowly becoming more and more reliable for Trump. He can basically count on all 3 of these states' electoral votes, which means that out of the remaining states, with the exception of Nevada, he only needs to win 1 more to clinch the presidency. And that state is probably going to be Pennsylvania. The Keystone State has been noted by basically everyone as being the most important state for both sides. If Trump wins Pennsylvania, he gets to over 270. And the reason why it's Pennsylvania is because, yes, Trump can definitely win states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, maybe even Virginia. But if he wins these states, he's already going to have won Pennsylvania by a larger margin. So in terms of the states that are necessary for him to win the White House, Pennsylvania is probably going to be the one that gets Trump over 270 electoral votes. He's retaken the lead in the polling averages, and he's definitely favored to win back the Keystone State. He won it by 0.72 in 2016. This was a very close margin. This was the first time a Republican won Pennsylvania in 24 years. And then in 2020, he lost it narrowly to Joe Biden by just over 1%. And today, he's going to win it back again. Pennsylvania is going to flip-flop back to the GOP, with Kamala Harris performing much worse than Biden and Clinton were in the polling at this point in 2020 and 2016. We have one final lean state, and that will be Wisconsin. After that disaster of a debate for Walz, he's going to hurt Harris now in Wisconsin. For a while, people thought Pennsylvania would vote to the right of Wisconsin just because Walz was going to give the vice president a boost in Wisconsin, as he is the governor of Minnesota, and the 2 states share a pretty long border. But at this point, it doesn't seem like Walz is helping out Harris too much. Trump is going to win Wisconsin by a lean margin. He's going to carry it by just over 2 points. In fact, Trump has done very well in Wisconsin in the last 2 election cycles. He won it by 0.76% in 2016, but then when he lost it in 2020, he was supposed to lose the state by 8 points. He lost it by just 0.6. Polling today shows a tie between Trump and Harris, which is a very good sign for the Trump campaign. And even when Biden won in 2020, he only won the state by 0.6, a smaller margin than Trump's from 4 years prior. And now we're left with just 4 states. These are going to be tilt states decided by 2 percentage points or less. I'm going to get the 2nd district of Nebraska out of the way first. It is going to be tilt blue. But then out in Nevada, this is a state that Trump can flip. It's a state he's never won before, as no Republican has carried Nevada since George W. Bush in 2004. But today, Nevada is shifting to the right. In 2016, Hillary Clinton carried the state by 2.4%. Joe Biden won it by the exact same margin in 2020 when he improved off of Clinton's margin in basically every other state. There were only 5 states where Biden did worse than Clinton. And in 2022, Republicans won the governorship here. Another clear sign that Nevada is shifting in favor of the GOP. And so this November, Trump has a very good chance at winning the state for the first time as a Republican in 20 years. And then the final state to go to the former president is going to be the Wolverine state of Michigan, a state he won back in 2016 against Hillary Clinton by a 0.2% margin. He lost it to Biden by 2.8, but he's on track to win it back this time around. Polling severely underestimated support for Trump in Michigan 4 years ago. He was supposed to lose the state by 7 11 points. He eventually lost it by less than 3, and today, the polls in Michigan are basically a tie, just like they are in Wisconsin. And when the polls are tied, you can be pretty confident that Trump is going to come out on top. And so the Michigan is going to be the final red state on the map. It's going to be tilt in favor of the former president. And now we're left with both Minnesota and Virginia. Virginia has always been very competitive this election cycle. Before Joe Biden dropped out, he was on track to lose the state entirely based on the polling average. And today, Kamala Harris isn't really doing that much better. Many polls have her leading by just 3 points. But considering Joe Biden carried the state by 10 points in the last election, I still do see Harris squeaking out a narrow victory. And then in Minnesota, Tim Walz's performance is not going to help him too much in the state. Minnesota is always going to be competitive. If Walz wasn't the Democratic vice presidential nominee, there's a very good chance Trump would currently be favored in the state. But Walz is still the governor. He's still going to give Harris a boost, but definitely not as much as he was going to give her before this debate. And so Minnesota, the last state on the map, is going to be tilt blue. It's going to be just as competitive as it was in 2016 when Hillary Clinton pulled out a 1.5% victory. Nobody thought it was going to get that close. And so following the first and probably only Vance-Walz debate, Trump is at 312 electoral votes, Harris at just 226. Trump is making gains in Wisconsin while Minnesota becomes more and more competitive. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe right now.
States, we have the battlegrounds of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona. All three of these states flipped from Trump in 2016 to Biden in 2020. But the most surprising of these was Arizona, since it has been one of the most reliably Republican states over the last 50 or so years. In 2020, Arizona went to Biden by a margin of plus 0.31. Wisconsin voted for him by a margin of plus 0.63, and Michigan voted for him by a margin of plus 2.8. But this election, these three states are pretty split. The most recent poll in Michigan shows Harris ahead by a margin of plus 1. If any of these three Rust Belt states is most likely to vote for Harris, it would be Michigan, given its margin in the last election. Moving on to the states that end their voting at 10 p.m. EST, we have Iowa, Montana, Utah, and the battleground state of Nevada. Montana and Utah can be made solid red since their latest poll shows Trump ahead by margins of plus 15 and plus 32, respectively. Iowa can be made a likely Republican state, even though the last poll shows a margin of only plus 4. Overall, polls here have heavily favored Trump, with the poll before this one showing him ahead by a margin of plus 12. And then the one before that, plus 18. And I think if Ohio is polling in a likely margin, given how close these two states have been politically over the last 8 years, I think Iowa will be too. And in Nevada, the most recent poll shows both candidates in another tie with 49% each. I would make this a toss-up state, but just like with some of our other battleground states, polls in the last election had the margin of error in the last election was almost 3 percentage points off, underestimating Trump. So because of this, I'm going to make Nevada another tilt Trump state. The group of states that close voting at 8 p.m. EST is our largest group, representing a staggering amount of votes. Out of these states, Trump can expect to win Alabama with plus 20, Mississippi with plus 18, Tennessee with plus 26, Missouri with plus 12, and Oklahoma with plus 16, making all these solid red. Meanwhile, Harris is guaranteed Maine's 1st district with plus 26, Massachusetts with plus 31, Rhode Island with plus 20, Connecticut with plus 17, Maryland with plus 31, and D.C., even though it doesn't have any polls from this cycle. Also usually included in this list are New Jersey and Delaware, but polls have shown margins too close recently to make them solid blue. Florida seems to have been getting closer and closer as we get closer to November, but polls have been very wrong in the past, especially in the Sunshine State, since it used to be one of the most heated battleground states. Florida's most recent poll shows Trump ahead plus 6, even though the current average shows Trump only ahead plus 4.2. But again, based on how it's voted historically and its previous polling errors, I expect these numbers to be underestimating Trump, making Florida a likely Republican state. So because of this, I'm going to make Nevada another tilt Trump state. Next up, we have Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and California, which all close their polls at 11 p.m. EST. Idaho can go for Trump in a safe margin, with its last poll showing a margin of plus 28. Washington and California can be made solid blue, with their last polls showing plus 21 and plus 25 respectively. And Oregon is going to be a likely Democrat state, even though its last poll shows a Harris margin of plus 5. In 2020, Biden won Oregon by a margin of plus 16.1, and a double-digit shift in either candidate's favor for any state is highly unlikely. And in Pennsylvania, which could very well be the most important state of this entire election, this is not only because it represents the most votes out of any of the other battlegrounds, but it is also the closest in the highly contested Rust Belt region. The most recent poll shows both candidates at a tie, and the one before that is also a tie, which just shows how close it really is. Polls here overall have been very split, but when you take into account the 3.5 point error from 2020, I think it'll end up going to Trump in the tilt margin. The last poll in New Jersey from a few months ago between Trump and Biden shows Trump pulling ahead with +1, which I think is a crazy poll, since in 2020, it voted for Biden by a margin of plus 15.9. And in Delaware, the latest poll shows Biden winning by a margin of plus 11. And even though this is an old poll too, it's still notable. So we are going to make both of these states likely Democrat rather than safe. Maine at large is also going to go to Harris in a likely margin, since the last poll shows her winning with a margin of +9. And I'm also going to give her Illinois by a likely margin, since polls here overall have been a lot closer than in past elections, even though the latest one shows her winning with +16. Looking first at each candidate's safe states, Trump is sure to win South Carolina with +14, Kentucky with +28, Indiana with +17. Out of these last three states in this group, Harris can only depend on Vermont to vote for her in a safe margin, especially since it's widely considered to be the most Democratic state in the nation. The most recent poll here shows this, since it gives Harris the win with a margin of +41, and the poll before that shows her winning with +40. Virginia in this election has been a lot closer than most expected, since Biden had almost doubled Clinton's margin in 2020 from +5.3 to +10.1. Like in many states this election, Trump has seen a massive boost in polls and overall popularity. The most recent poll shows Harris winning with +10, and it seems like she has steadily been recovering from how close it got when Biden was still in the race. But just a month ago, she was polling with margins of +3, and in July, polls between Trump and Harris showed Republicans leading with +4 and +1. Even though it looks like Harris has been making a comeback here, I think it'll end up being closer to what we saw in 2016, and I'd personally be shocked if she performs better in Virginia than Biden did in the last election. And in our first battleground state, Georgia, which was the closest state of the entire 2020 election, polls have been neck and neck. Looking at the most recent average, currently Trump leads by a margin of +1, with most polls giving him high tilt or low lean margins. The last poll shows Trump ahead by a margin of +2, and the two before that shows him winning with another +2, and then an even bigger +3. Given how much the former president is doing across the country, it'd be very surprising if we see a margin as close as the +0.24 we saw in the last election. And honestly, I think polls are slightly underestimating Trump, so I'm going to lean it rather than tilt it in his favor. It's been over a week since the debate, and Trump is surging in the most recent polls. Today, we're going to be looking at my prediction for the 2024 election based on the most recent polls in all 50 states, and to show you what you can actually expect to see on election day. I'll be filling in the map in order based on when their voting ends.
Now, most forecasters out there have all 7 rated as toss-ups right now, with neither Trump or Harris holding a discernible advantage at this point in time. They were each decided by less than 3 percentage points in the 2020 election, and with the exception of Nevada, which voted Democrat twice, and North Carolina, which voted for Trump in both elections, the other 5 states all swung from Trump in 2016 to Biden in 2020. Now, here in 2024, the path to victory for both candidates runs through some combination of victories across these 7 states. For Trump, his most efficient path would be to hold on to North Carolina and then flip both Georgia and Pennsylvania. That would get him to exactly 270 electoral votes. Meanwhile, for Harris, she would hit exactly 270 as well, simply by holding on to the WIMPA states, the Blue Wall states, the Upper Rust Belt core trio, whatever you want to call them, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, plus Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, which Biden carried by almost 7 points 4 years ago. Saying all of that, though, given that this is a best-case scenario map for Donald Trump, and neither candidate truly has a better than 55 to maybe 60% chance of winning in any one of these 7 states, it's only reasonable to place all 7 in the Trump column, just as it will be in the Harris version of this video. Exactly does Donald Trump's best case scenario look like on the 2024 Electoral College map? Now, we are almost certainly headed for another extremely close race come November 5th. As we currently speak, Harris holds a 2-point lead nationally, that is, per Real Clear polling. According to Nate Silver, with a national popular vote lead of D+1 to D+2, Harris would probably have about a 20% chance of winning the Electoral College, and that increases to approximately 50% with a margin of D+2 to D+3. Next, we have our lean states, where either candidate would be expected to win by margins of around 3 to 7 percentage points in this scenario. For Kamala Harris, the only 2 states that I would feel comfortable placing in this category are New Mexico, with its 5 electoral votes, and then up in Maine as well, where the statewide vote has consistently gone blue in every election dating back to 1988. That is tied for the second longest streak in the nation. Now, Maine voted for Joe Biden by 9 points in 2020, and both polls released here this cycle have Harris leading by at least that much. It's a similar story over in New Mexico. It voted for Joe Biden by 11 points in 2020, and the 2 polls surveyed this cycle have Harris leading by exactly 10 points. Now, notably, both Maine and New Mexico rank among the most rural states in the nation. In fact, they are 2 of the 3 least urbanized states that Biden won in 2020. While New Mexico also ranks second lowest among Biden 2020 states in the share of residents with a college degree. And those are both factors that do suggest it could start to trend more Republican as the urban-rural divide and educational polarization intensify in future cycles. Not to mention, New Mexico has the highest share of Hispanic voters in the entire country, and Republicans have made consistent gains among that racial demographic in recent cycles as well. Now, the other 3 states that are often grouped in a similar category are Minnesota, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and New Hampshire, as they each voted for Joe Biden by likely margins in 2020, yet in this case, we have seen the polls in each state so far this cycle suggest that the races could be much closer than expected, especially while Biden remained in the race. Right now, Harris leads by 5.7% in New Hampshire based on the last 3 polls. Those have ranged from Harris +4 all the way up to Harris +8. Then in Virginia, she leads by 5.3%, a very similar margin, with the 3 polls here ranging from Harris +3 to Harris +8. Again, very similar. And finally, in Minnesota, we see Harris up 5.4%, with the polls here ranging from Harris +5 to Harris +6. So remarkably similar leads for the vice president across all 3 states. Now, back in the 2016 election, when Trump defeated Hillary Clinton, he came within half a point of flipping New Hampshire, 5 points short in Virginia, and then within just 1.5 points in Minnesota. On that note, I could see each of them dip back below 3 points this cycle on a best case map for Trump, and therefore go in the tilt blue column. That leaves us with the 7 key battlegrounds that we have talked about all cycle long. Meanwhile, for Harris, she would hit exactly 270 as well, simply by holding on to the WIMPA states, the Blue Wall states, the Upper Rust Belt core trio, whatever you want to call them, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, plus Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, which Biden carried by almost 7 points 4 years ago. Saying all of that, though, given that this is a best-case scenario map for Donald Trump, and neither candidate truly has a better than 55 to maybe 60% chance of winning in any one of these 7 states, it's only reasonable to place all 7 in the Trump column, just as it will be in the Harris version of this video. That may seem like a cop-out or anticlimactic to some extent, but it's moments like these where we need to take a second and appreciate what is happening here. It may not feel like it because every election over the last few decades has been labeled, the most important race of our lifetimes, but it's truly extraordinary to be less than 2 months out from an election day and not have a clear favorite in the presidential race. And that increases to approximately 50% with a margin of D+2 to D+3. Now, turning our attention back to the map, we will examine Trump's most favorable hypothetical outcome. And since my channel is entirely nonpartisan, I will also be doing a best case scenario for Kamala Harris in the coming days as well. So make sure to subscribe below to catch that and the other videos that I will be uploading every single day before Election Day. Now, all of these states and districts combine for 149 electoral votes. That's more than half of the necessary total of 270 that is required to become president of the United States. Trump carried each of these states by at least 8 percentage points back in 2020, and in a best case scenario, we can certainly assume that they will all shift by at least 2 points to the right, and therefore that he would win each of these states by double digits this time around. Yet here in 2024, the Real Clear polling average shows Trump leading by more than 7 points in Texas. That is based on the last 3 polls, and by exactly 6% in Florida based on 5 polls. Now, both of these states are likely to trend to the right this cycle, even in a neutral 50-50 environment, as Republicans have made significant gains among Hispanic voters in South Texas, down here in the Rio Grande Valley, and in South Florida, here in the Miami-Dade metropolitan area over the last few cycles. It may not feel like it because every election over the last few decades has been labeled, the most important race of our lifetimes, but it's truly extraordinary to be less than 2 months out from an election day and not have a clear favorite in the presidential race, much less have no strong clue as to how 7 states on the battleground map will vote. I mean, there is a realistic scenario in which either candidate can win 300 electoral votes by sweeping all 7. That's pretty crazy. Obviously, the most likely scenario is that they do split in some way, shape, or form, but here, in a best-case scenario for the former president, Trump, he should win each of these states, and thereby secure an electoral college win with 312 electoral votes.